these people are not my friends. I think they're fundamentally incorrect about seemingly all of their analyses. They're pathological by definition. Seems to me this woke worldview it's just the zealotry of the new age, and they act as the modern inquisitors of our time, And listen, I just say full out, fuck you. I'm not playing this game with these people at all for 1 second. I'm not going to have to I don't need to justify why I feel the way I do. You put the onus on them. Most of these people are fantastically uneducated. Like I said, pathological by definition. And take some of the most bizarre positions imaginable.
Greetings, Legion. Welcome to episode 252 of Into the Necrosphere. This week, recorded in person in the bowels of the world-famous Dome venue in Tufnell Park in London. I caught up with my very good friend Brock van Dijk of Panzerfaust. I caught them on one of the dates of their current tour with Kanon and Fever. They have, as you should be aware, just put out one of the year's very best albums, the final chapter in their Suns of Perdition quadrilogy, an extraordinarily ambitious undertaking that Brock discussed with me in detail. We also spoke about where the band go from here, and of course, considering the topics covered on the Suns of Perdition quadrilogy, we had to get a little spicy with the conversation. So if you are easily triggered, this is not one for you, but it is an episode that I am incredibly proud of and really happy that I finally got to sit down with Brock in person. This is his third appearance on the show. So if you listen to either of our previous two episodes, you know what to expect. Absolutely no quarter asked, none given. It's coming your way very shortly, but first, we need to get you warmed up for the conversation that is to come. Der Rote Milan is a black metal band out of Germany. They have just put out a new EP called Schlund. The EP features artwork by the great Matt Prizzo, higher-ranking member of the Legion. He turned me on to these guys. I absolutely loved it. Thought I should share it with you. So for your listening pleasure, this is Der Rote Milan with Erloschen. A track called Adolescent ripping through your eardrums on this week's Unsanctioned Filth segment. That's right. Nathan Glover of Gravier very kindly took the initiative to come up with a name that I believe suits the opening segment of Into the Necrosphere. So the unsigned or independent band spotlight, or whatever garbage name I had given it previously, is no more. We will now call the opening segment of this podcast Unsanctioned Filth. And the Unsanctioned Filth for this week is Der Rote Milan's brand new single, Adolescent, as I said, off their new EP, Schlund. It also features the artwork of the dangerous, the brilliant Matt Prizzo, high-ranking member of the Australian chapter of the Legion. Check out that EP on Bandcamp right now, and if you like what you heard, make sure that you let them know who sent you if you end up buying anything. My friends, you may be listening to this podcast for the first time ever and wondering, what am I supposed to do when I'm done with the 3.5 hours plus runtime of episode 252 of Into the Necrosphere? Am I just to wander around aimlessly on the streets crying because I've got nothing to listen to or nothing to watch? Well, I am not in the war against mediocrity alone. I'm also joined by an elite unit of men known as the Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse. And together, we are dedicated to filling your week with high-quality entertainment from Monday to Sunday. Mondays, we've got Horrorwolf 666, hosted by the inimitable Brandon Legion. On a Tuesday, yours truly casts hexes and slays poses on Into the Necrosphere. My guests next week will be the two gentlemen that make up Veil Burner, and we are doing a full director's commentary of the new Veil Burner record. It is always mind-bending, the concepts and the threads that run through any Veil Burner album. This was no exception. I'm very excited about sharing that one with you. And then I think I've got about 2 more episodes before we wrap up for the year. Got potentially 2 surprises on the horizon for those as well. So I'm confident we're going to wrap up the year on a very, very high note. And of course, I want to say thank you once again to long-serving members of the Legion for your support and for continuing to share the show, for helping me up those numbers on the ratings on Spotify, on Apple, etc. All of those things make a massive difference, and I'm really grateful to all of you for it. And I am super excited about what 2025 holds for this podcast. Moving on a Wednesday, we have got Sensei Mike Hill bringing you another installment of Everything Went Black. We also have Cheyenne of the band Trivax giving you a deployment of his podcast, Iblis Manifestations. On a Thursday, Sensei Mike Hill returns alongside Sheriff Mike Scondado and Professor Jeff Kashid for one of my favorite podcasts, the informative, highly entertaining, thrilling Necromaniacs. The best way to set up your viewing schedule, your viewing agenda for the weekend ahead. They review new and old horror movies, and I make sure that I never, ever miss Necromaniacs, come what may. We also have on a Thursday the first of 2 installments of the Sinister Minister, the Reverend Carl Haikara's curated journey through the dark, the weird, the arcane, and the esoteric. And of course, he wraps up your week on a Sunday with part 2 of Soul Knox. My friends, when I am done talking to Brock, don't go anywhere because this week I am doing another solo news rant. We are rounding up the latest singles by the likes of Nexion. Let's see who else we've got. Panzerchrist, Detest, Maceration, Dawn of Solace, and others for judgment. We pointed and laughed at a new single by Elven King, a band who consist of grown men that pretend to be into elves and fairies. I answered many of the Legion's questions, and again, thank you very much to all of you who have provided questions for the weekly Q&A. So I'll be covering all of those. So don't go anywhere when I'm done talking to Brock, because there's at least another hour's worth of metal merriment coming your way. Right now, though, for the first time in probably over 2 years, a long overdue return to Into the Necrosphere by Brock Van Dijk of Panzerfaust. Just one quick note about this conversation. We actually did it in two parts. We did about 40 minutes. Then he went off to go and do a sound check, and then we did the remaining 40 minutes after that. So you'll hear a bit of a break halfway through the conversation. There's about 20, 30 minutes in between. That obviously, he had other responsibilities, other obligations. But I really do hope that you guys are going to enjoy this conversation and approach it with an open mind, as I know the Legion always does. I'm going to zip my lip and welcome, once again, Brock of Panzerfaust.
Well, let's cheers first and foremost. Dude,
Yeah.
what a fucking pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, likewise, Jackie.
We've known each other for, 4 years?
I think so, yeah. I feel like we actually have known each other, even though it's the first time we're actually meeting in person. So it's nice to finally make your acquaintance.
Well, and also nice to make your acquaintance off the back of, your coup de grace. I was thinking about it when on the way in, and this must have been such an enormous undertaking, and especially because in some ways, if you go back to the first chapter of the Suns of Perdition quadrilogy, you guys kind of set your stall out at the beginning, because if you said right at the start, this part,
we had a plan in mind. We're going to do this 4-chapter record, and whatever form it ultimately takes, it's going to be within those parameters. So I kind of have a central idea with which to start. It's an idea we could extrapolate into ultimately a pretty expansive piece of work. So, but a hell of a ride, I got to say. Fuck, it was we had started with this idea. It was like something of a juvenile idea. Like, we're gonna do this 4-chapter, gonna be the most ambitious goddamn thing that anyone's gonna ever try. Something like this. But of course, there was a sexual idea behind it. It wasn't just just entirely just a juvenile idea, but we started working on it probably about 8 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And over the course of that, we started the first chapter. I ended up living in our jam space for over 3 years.
I remember you telling me about
Yeah, living there, and there's no windows, no running water, but you can smoke inside, so it does a lot. Does a lot for the creative engine if you can do that. So
yeah.
But then I ended up moving out of that jam space. It was it got a little bit maybe claustrophobic, maybe not a completely incorrect way of putting it. Just I needed to kind of get some air, because it was just getting a bit much. I was developing probably some bad habits in the process. So with the 4th chapter, I was able to do it from a slightly different perspective, which I think was probably a smart thing to do, because 4th chapter we had to make it. We were all acutely aware that if we fuck this one up, I'm gonna have to turn the gun on myself, and I'd rather not do that if I can avoid it. So I'm pretty happy with the way it ultimately.
Who tabled the idea for 4 parts?
I'd like to say I did. I probably did, but in some sense it was like a collective thing. You don't just say, we're going to do a 4-chapter, everybody get on board, It's like everybody
grab your instruments.
That's right, we're going for a ride. No, but I kind of, it was probably primarily Alex and myself.
Yeah.
Because he's, got to say, a pretty extraordinary musician as a drummer. I don't tell that to his face, you know what I mean? I don't want it to get to his head after all, but no, him and I were kind of had something of an agreement that we're gonna pursue this undertaking, and we're going to see it to the end, right? So we knew that, like with that idea in mind, it kept us always looking kind of to the horizon or whatever. So, and not to mention, it's just been pretty much just old-fashioned hard work. We've been going in there multiple times a week for years now, just nonstop writing and reforming, and iron sharpening iron, you know what I mean? So it's been a lot of work, and it's something like this doesn't happen just out of spontaneity. It does take a lot of just general hard work. So
in terms of the development of the material and of the lyrics, because I think, I'm trying to keep myself honest here, so I'm not imagining anything. But I think initially you had kind of laid out the steps, like the chapters. The first one being and correct me if I'm wrong here. So the prelude to the war. War is kind of the central focus, or the conflict is the central focus of Render Unto Eden.
Yep.
Chapter 3 is kind of the aftermath and this somber kind of reflection on what happened. And then it very brilliantly, and I pointed this out at the time that Astral Drain came out, it very brilliantly kind of sets the cliffhanger in the very last song for the carnage that's going to come with chapter 4.
That's right. Yeah.
Did you have that, at least that framework, kind of thought out when the material started forming, or how did that?
Well, I think like the way that we were thinking about it, because you wanted to not just essentially just piece 4 like random pieces. There needed to be some type of synchronicity between the chapters, lest it would just seem without purpose. So always pretty particular about how we begin the chapter and how it ends and how it's going to lead into the succeeding chapter. So, for example, the Men of No Man's Land ends with the song "Going Home," which is a famous song for, especially for the English-speaking world, of the troops going home after the conflict had concluded, which allows a little time for some reflection, and then Promethean fire coming in on the second chapter. It kind of starts with a pretty kind of expansive philosophical idea, which we end up using the Plato's allegory of the cave to use for the music video, which kind of put on I guess we could say like a visual element of what was trying to be conveyed in that song. Then ending with Pascal's wager. Again, it's like there are kind of the peaks and valleys that will begin with something that kind of comes honing in, and then something at the conclusion of it that lets it go out. Now, the thing with chapter 3, we end up with Tabula Rasa. It's like much more kind of contemplative sounding. I remember speaking with you saying, look, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some people who are going to hate this fucking record because they're going to think we're going soft. So that's with chapter 4. It's like, rest assured, we're not getting soft.
Yeah.
But we had to take a bit of a risk with chapter 3 because we wanted to do something sonically quite different from the first 2 chapters. I mean, I think it's certainly still a Panzerfaust record.
I read some of the criticism about that album, and I never quite got it. Like for me, it made sense in the sequencing, and 2, there's a lot of heavy stuff on the record. If you're after a heavy, aggressive Panzerfaust, you've got that, especially with Tabula Rasa. But you've got a lot of more contemplative, sort of visual music than necessarily the bludgeoning of more horrid war.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, like the first chapter was kind of like kick the fucking door in, you know what I mean? Yeah. You got to make a statement off the bat. At least that was how we thought about it. But the thing was like it was the fact that I had these ideas, like riff ideas for the 3rd chapter that never quite fit. So it may have actually been the Astral Drain, which was ultimately named. It was the seminal ideas from that chapter is probably what gave us the overarching idea to do it as the tetralogy. Yeah. So for whatever you think about it, for better or for worse, that was probably what was the seminal idea that allowed this whole kind of concept to become a reality. So, but yeah, I mean, recording that was kind of our COVID record because as everybody was just being, reduced to their homes and their worst instincts and the rest of it, as everybody was, looking out for their neighbor, as they like to say, for the greater good. We put ourselves in a room, breathing each other's diseased air, and we were writing a record. I make no apologies for that whatsoever. So, it's been a fucking ride. I got to be honest, since we just released the record, it's like I'm not sure if I'm far away enough from it in the sense where once you finish a record, I feel like it takes probably about 6 months to actually be able to maybe listen to it as a listener. You're still too close to it, so you're still kind of in a writing mood, even though it's certainly done. At some point, you got to hammer in the last of the coffin nails, because otherwise you can write this thing forever and ultimately probably drive yourself to madness in the process. So, yeah, at some point you just have to say it's done, it's over, close the book, and then put it out into the world and just, be what it may,
I was going to say, so how does it feel to get that out, like get that final chapter done? Well, and it's something that, it would have consumed your life for the better part of 8 years.
Absolutely. Pretty much every waking and sleeping moment, I would be like, even from the beginning, like you might just be starting off working on some parts, be like, you open up your voice memos. We don't really do it all that sophisticated. Open up your voice memos, press record, and start playing in the room. And I'd be jammed, and I'd go home and listen to these things through the night. I'd be trucking when I'm back home. And I would be like in a truck stop listening to demos, blasting all night, be going to sleep, and have the music at full volume all throughout the night, every single night. I just would never turn it off. And that's kind of borderline psychotic, if I'm totally honest, but it's kind of what was required.
Yeah.
But I was just saying, it was all consuming. I think the way I felt is that not getting any younger, you probably have one opportunity to try to pull something like this off in your lifetime, because you're not going to do it twice. So if we're going to do it once, you better do it right the first time. So I had pretty much an obsessive feeling about this, and I think, like I was saying about with everybody being on board from the beginning, I think everybody had a real kind of emotional investment in actually getting this done. I think everybody understood the size and scope of what we were trying to accomplish. You didn't want to just seem like we were just being facetious or overly ambitious, because there's the very likely pitfalls that you end up fucking something like this up because you bite off more than you can chew. You're maybe a little bit too ambitious. So I think we all understood the importance of making sure that we took this act seriously.
Did the fear of that, or the apprehension about having bit off more than you can chew, did that ever enter into your mind as you were doing it?
I think only the time I may have felt that for a moment and not a moment more was with chapter 4. Because I understood that, this had to, all things must come to an end.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than ending it off with something subpar. And it's entirely possible. And you don't even know until you release the album, how people are going to take it. You can only really write for yourselves. If you like the music, you got to hope that maybe people see it your way. But it's not like there's been no shortage of albums that maybe surely an artist creates thinking it's going to be great and ends up being received with dog shit reviews, right? So, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? It's like these things certainly happen. They're a hell of a lot more common. They're certainly not rare.
You guys don't record with a producer or anything like that.
No, we do it. We actually in our studio. We have a guy by the name of Greg Dawson. We've been working together for 13 years.
So at least there's a external voice that can kind of bring you out of it a little bit.
Because sorry, I didn't cut you off, but Greg Dawson, a studio called BWC Studios. It's in Kingston in Ontario in Canada, and we've been working there for a long time. And it's I remember at the beginning of when we started the chapters, I had seen him. I said, Greg, I have this idea. We have this idea. We want to work on this record. We want to do this. And he said, okay. I think he probably thought, like, this guy's a little bit fucking crazy. You know what I mean? But I just said, I don't ask a lot of you, but I just ask that you put every piece of your heart and soul into this record.
We're not making too many demands. Yeah. This has to consume your life.
Nothing too crazy. Yeah. But so anyways, we started this undertaking. I mean, as a producer, he is really like a producer in every sense of the word, because I kind of consider him to be like the shadow fifth member in a way, because although he doesn't have any part in the writing process by any means, but once we're in the studio, we work together really well. We have an understanding, and sometimes, like, 'cause I like to go into a studio with you want to have as complete of a song as you possibly can, but you want to leave some room for experimentation.
Yeah.
You need to have some elasticity to some certain elements. I always leave a little bit of a voided space to allow that to occur. And I'll trust what he has to say. If he says, Brock, you're making the song worse, I trust him when he says that, because I don't feel like it's not, he's not being self-interest. He genuinely wants to create the best record possible. Yeah. And sometimes we may have conflicting ideas, and there's a line I'll tell him, and he always says, like, this is one of your classic lines. I just say, Greg, trust me, just trust me. It's okay, I trust you, right? So sometimes, it doesn't work. Sometimes we disagree, but if you feel strongly enough about it, it's like, okay, well, I trust you. Then we just keep it going. So we get a lot done, considering it's a lot of work, and especially with this last chapter, like being in the studio. It's not just, you're not going in there and recording a record in a weekend,
Yeah.
It's like, it's a classic story for a producer, where a guy might come and be like, we got 10 songs. We think we can get it done in a weekend, where we got the songs really tight. Well, you're not in any sense making a record if you can do it in a weekend. Maybe I'll record a punk rock record off the floor, but that's not what we're doing. We're trying to make something that's going to withstand the test of time, and things like that just generally don't happen at a flashpoint. So
yeah. Well, you're making what I think is going to be the definitive, or the definitive records of the Panzerfaust discography.
Sure.
I think. You could very well write a record, I think, that's better after this, but just the scale, the ambition, like you were mentioning earlier, that it was something that was, more ambitious than anyone had ever done before. I think you are literally correct. I don't think anyone's ever attempted something like that.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound like narcissistic or self-absorbed by saying that. That was kind of our intention. And it's like, I don't know, I guess we'll have to see. Like, we can't be the final arbiters of whether or not that's true. That will be for other people to decide. And if it doesn't end up being that, that's fine. I'm still proud of the work we did regardless, because I have to say it's probably the great honor and privilege of my life to be doing this with these guys, to be able to have done this. I generally like being able to have, I guess what's the way I'm putting it? I like being able to work collaboratively with people, so that there's a shared sense of accomplishment, because you can really appreciate a lot more when you have some comrades with you that can feel it in kind. So
you guys do, like, you present very much as a brotherhood. You guys are like the black metal version of the Sons of Anarchy. Like, there's a closeness in the band that you get from every single thing that you guys do, and I think it's come out more and more on these records as each successive chapter has come out. There's a cohesion in the way that you guys play, in the way that you write, the interplay between your and Goliath's vocals. There's just this, like when somebody is a true master at something, there's like an effortlessness to what they do.
Sure, yeah.
And there's that, I've picked up, particularly on this record, there's like that effortlessness where it's sort of like you're so good at what you're doing, you're making this look very easy. Like, I like,
that's very kind of you.
Non-Panzerfaust example. Like, I've always said on the podcast about Dimebag Darrell's solos.
Yeah.
I always said, like, that guy was so brilliant at playing guitar and could read and understand a guitar so well. He would play a solo and it would literally sound like he's fucking jerking off.
Yeah.
It was just second nature.
Much to the enjoyment of many others.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like it was just second nature to him. You guys have started to get into that rare air.
Well, I guess I feel like maybe it may have like hit our kind of an apex with the fourth chapter. I think we've also gotten better at just, apart from anything else, just being better at playing our instruments, understanding what makes a good Panzerfaust song, or what makes it just a Panzerfaust song authentically that. And then the more you write, the more time you spend, because at the end of the day, it's just hours spent will make you better at your craft.
Yeah.
And so we've gotten a way of understanding each other as musicians, playing to our strengths, not allowing egos to get in the way of the songwriting process, because that can really be the extreme detriment when you have. Well, I put it this way: it's like I might be considered like the band leader, but we don't operate this like it's some type of dictatorship.
Yeah.
Because dictatorships always end the same way.
Yeah.
And it's the oldest cliche in the book. Dictatorships are self-devouring. They'll destroy by definition because they don't allow dissenting voices. So kind of take that type of thought process, and I want everybody to be on the same page. You might lead the band, but I'm no means, it's not my band, it's our band. We're all in it together. I try to go to great lengths to make sure that everybody feels that way, because if we all feel we're on the same page, it makes us collectively much stronger than somebody who's acting with an iron fist in a band, because a lot of bands get destroyed because of that type of impulse from one person. Can become a little too totalitarian, let's say. And so,
well, on that's a nice segue into another question I have for you. But to what degree, as this quadrilogy was being formed, to what degree does contemporary events impact what you guys are doing? Because again, this record comes out right as we're in a place where both Russia and the US and the UK are acting incredibly provocatively towards each other.
Sure, yeah.
In a way that, you start to read the description. I don't know whether you saw a movie called Threads.
I don't think so.
Came out in, I think, like 1984. It's an incredibly unsettling watch about the real life fallout of nuclear war between NATO and Russia.
Sure, yeah.
You read it and you go, was this prophecy? It's fucking horrible.
Well, I mean, to me, it seems pure insanity. I mean, these things they're obviously complicated, because when the Soviet Union dissolved, Gorbachev said, okay, listen, I'm going to dissolve the Soviet Union, but you need to make me one promise, that you're not going to expand NATO even 1 inch to the east. To which the United States, which is obviously the primary player here on the other side, despite what people may want to think, but they said, okay, we won't move NATO even 1 inch eastward. Now, fast forward, they've moved quite a bit more to the east.
Quite a few more inches.
And it's important to understand, in the Second World War, 1 in every 7 Russians died. This is something I don't think people quite understand to put into perspective. In Russia, they'll refer to it as the Great Patriotic War. And for everyone, they, for all intents and purposes, were the ones who paid the largest price to win the Second World War. So that can't be forgotten. You can understand why Russians may feel as though NATO ever encroaching further to the east may be an unpardonable interference in their internal affairs. You take that on one side, because it's quite often what we're kind of looking at from a Western perspective is that, okay, well, Russia is a worrisome actor, because of course, apart from being a nuclear power, I guess the narrative is that they're an expansionist one as well. Pressed into Crimea when Obama was president. Yeah. And so you have to at least try to, whether you agree with that analysis, you at least have to understand what your supposed adversary may be feeling.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, you have to think about what are we doing here, just on a practical matter. I mean, of course, the Ukrainians are fighting bravely, and were able to fend off an invasion in a way I don't think anybody initially thought possible.
No.
So you absolutely cannot take away from the bravery of the people there and their commitment to maintaining their homeland. You might see Putin might say, well, the Ukraine is historically Russian lands, but Ukrainians, of course, have the right to self-determination and to their own identity. It's also fair to say, though, that what are we doing here? Because are we just going to keep sending Ukrainians into the meat grinder, and Western governments are going to keep pumping out money into this war machine? Because what is the logical end to this? When people start using rhetoric like tactical nuclear weapons, excuse me, what the fuck are we talking about in that tactical nuclear weapons? So we're not going to use Tsar Bomba, we're just going to use Fat Boy and Little Man. Well, this is insane. We're talking about using the deploying of nuclear weapons on the European continent. And I think that's an unpardonable waste of human life. And where does this end? But we've always been operating under the doctrine of mutually assured destruction since the Cold War, which is, I think, a pretty fair doctrine.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you ever heard, I forget the name of the author, her name escapes me, but she basically talks about what happens in the initial seconds of
I know
nuclear.
exactly who you're talking about. I just can't remember the name.
Yeah, I listened to her in a few podcasts. I wanted to read her book. I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but
I think my brain blocked it out.
Well,
because
I
it was
think
so fucking horrible.
Well, no, it's true.
I remember very clearly hearing
they
the
talk about the
podcast.
first 6 or 7 minutes, what happens, and the seismic echoes of a nuclear exchange. It's one of these funny terms. It's a nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
Which essentially renders the entire planet, or a vast majority of the planet, lifeless and barren. And it's like, what are we talking about here? So maybe the people, maybe these, as Bob Dylan refers to, these masters of war, maybe they might have a bunker to go hide in so they can live out what's left of their meaningless lives underneath a dead planet. But what these people are cannot be trusted. If they're talking about using nuclear weapons, like surely we could come to a reasonable conclusion here. Now you have to think about the practical matter. How does this end? It seems to me like there has to be some type of diplomatic solution. So to ask, what is the logical end of just constantly funding a war machine? Because if Ukraine is now going into Russian territory, as a tactician, I can understand they want to have negotiating leverage. Fine. I get that. But what happens if they encroach a little too far? What happens if the Russians decide they want to use nuclear weapons? Then what? Now, will this ultimately mean that Ukraine has to concede some territory? I probably think that's probably going to be the case. I'm not saying that I think it's a good thing that they have to, but if we're trying to avoid nuclear war, surely a diplomatic solution is.
I was about to say,
option.
there's fair and then there's reality.
Sure.
And reality is an undefeated champion.
Yeah.
So if they're going to have to concede so that this doesn't turn into a full-scale Third World War like a lot of people are saying, then they're going to have to concede. I do feel for them very much. I know people in the Ukraine. I certainly don't wish any ill on them, but the reality of it is they're not even formally allies of ours. So for me for what the government in the UK and in the US is doing is unpardonable. The fact that they're providing weapons to the Ukraine very publicly, weapons that are going to be used inside of Russian territory. Russia then fires off a salvo of ICBMs just as a warning, and they go, "Well, that's a really retaliatory and major escalation. We can't believe you've done it." It's like, well,
can I give you 1 sec? I'm just going to pee really quickly because we're anyway. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to pee.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was about to say it's a poignant moment.
Yeah, well, I think these things are important to talk about.
Yeah,
I think there's probably there's a lot of fundamental dishonesty about what's going on with these topics. I mean, it seems odd to me that you see. It's actually probably about one of the songs I wrote on chapter 4, Nexion Conversions. How there's been these ideological repolarization of conventional wisdom, left-right politics. I don't think means what it used to.
definitely not.
And I imagine, because I think the Anglosphere has probably a lot of similarities in the broader Western world, maybe even a little bit less so. Because why is it that the people who are vehemently would be protesting against the Iraq War, for example, when the Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz doctrine was being employed of American expansionism? I mean, obviously, what happened in Iraq, I think the conventional wisdom is that was a mistake.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel the intentions were, and they were certainly jaded intentions. Like we can fairly say that in retrospect. The same people who were very much against the war in Iraq seem to be cheering on the war in Ukraine in a way that seems quite bizarre to me. I think any reasonable person understands that war is hell and war should be avoided at any cost. Surely and of course, a just wars sometimes must be fought. But you have to also question, okay, what is ultimately a just war? What happens when all the young men of Ukraine have been grinded away? Because they seem quite resolute to fight to the last man, and I respect that tremendously. But is that ultimately what should happen? I mean, I would argue not. I think young men dying and mothers mourning over their offspring being thrown into a meat grinder is, it's awful, Nothing worse than having to bury a child. If as far as I can see, I mean, I'm not even a parent myself, but I can imagine if I did have kids, it would be unbelievably, probably be the worst thing imaginable, So anyways, but yeah, you understand what I mean. It's like you get some very strange things that are happening right now. I mean, of course, let's just get right into it. We're talking about getting spicy. We can just get right into it. You have obviously what's happening with Israel and Hamas, and that is very bizarre to me. We were actually supposed to be playing a festival in Tel Aviv when October 7th happened. Oh,
really? Were you going to be at that festival?
Yes, we were supposed to play that festival. It logistically didn't ultimately end up working. We ended up seeing Alfsky. We toured with them just after that, and they were in Israel at the time.
Yeah,
maybe I don't want to drop their name and perhaps get them in trouble for anything I may or may not say in this conversation. That you can't say anything in this conversation with somebody pointing a gun at you or the mob trying to come at you. But it's it's very strange to me to see some of the really kind of reprehensible anti-Semitism come to the forefront. I'm not trying to discredit or try to say that the plight of Palestinian peoples to self-determination isn't a legitimate one, but I have to say when I'm seeing people screaming "gas the Jews" in the streets, I have a pretty good understanding of history, at least better than most. And when you start seeing fanatical anti-Semitism coming to the streets, unapologetically so, the alarm bells have to go off.
Yeah. Well, you had people here in London during some of those protests where one guy was filmed, put on the news, and unashamedly said, "Hitler knew what to do with these people."
I know, I saw
I was
myself,
fucking gobsmacked.
Well, I know what makes it even worse. I think this is something I actually wanted to bring up to you because, you see these scenes of people saying Hitler was right, gas the Jews. And this is happening in Toronto as well. And your prime minister says, no, the biggest problem is people saying Islamophobic things online.
Yeah.
This, to me, I think is absolutely reprehensible because this is part of a broader problem with the Western world is that as the Western world is abandoning its principles of free inquiry and free expression, and we need to cracking down on supposed quote-unquote hate speech, while people are saying gas the Jews in the streets, then somebody says something maybe unsavory online.
Yeah.
And it's the person online who's going to be thrown into prison. Now, I'm something of a free speech absolutist. The only people in the world that have this topic correct are the Americans. The First Amendment to the Constitution is the only... The United States is the only country that really does have free expression in a real meaningful sense, which is can't be said in the same way for the rest of the Western world. The free speech protections are the most important thing one can value in a free society, because without the freedom to speak your mind or speak your truth, you're not in any meaningful sense a free person. So I started to see things like what's happening like here in the UK, people getting locked up for, they might say the most unsavory thing, but as far as I'm concerned, they should have the right to say whatever.
Yeah, you're talking about 62 and 63-year-old men being thrown in jail for 2 years because they shared a couple of memes.
That's-
They're emptying the jails out of criminals. Those criminals include people that were guilty of assault, guilty of rape. In some cases, they're being let out of prison and reoffending on the same day.
To make room for people sharing memes.
Exactly, and then guy who shares memes goes to jail.
And this is happening in varying degrees and across the Western world. It's like, where are your fucking priorities, people?
Yeah.
Where you're going to let out rapists and murderers for people who are sharing a meme online as if that has ever hurt anyone? Well, you know what? I say to hell with that law. You know, I'd violate it openly. Come arrest me. If you arrest me, I'll go on hunger strike. I'm telling you, I'm not fucking around when it comes to this type of thing. You know, we see these things happening in Canada as well. You know,
I'm about to say Trudeau is awfully keen on censoring social media as much as he can. There was the whole thing that happened.
You wouldn't
podcasts.
believe this would make you curl your hair. Sorry, I
mean, I keep a reasonably close eye on what's going on in Canada, just because I find Pierre Poilievre to be fucking hysterically entertaining.
Yeah,
I mean, I literally watch like Canadian C-SPAN just to watch him lay into Trudeau.
Yeah, you watch him in the House of Commons. It's quite interesting to watch. Maybe. Well, it's kind of what's crazy is because with Trudeau, I mean, what he's done to the country of Canada is he's just so sufficiently violated our reputation around the world. What a country that historically we could trust our media establishment. We could kind of trust our politicians, whether they were conservative or liberal. It would go back and forth as any kind of pendulum, but it was all reasonably into the center. Once he took power, I mean, apart from, he's a megalomaniacal narcissist. Anybody, you just look at him, you can tell. And apart from anything else, being grossly unqualified and not burdened by a tremendous degree of self-doubt, and something of a utopian, and anybody who knows anything about utopians is that they can do a lot of bad, a lot of bad for the world. And what's happening in Canada it's just absolutely reprehensible. Where do I begin? Essentially, there's been things that are happening across the Western world more broadly, but what's happening in Canada is this on steroids. If you ever thought like a hyper woke, the most annoying and obnoxious person that's ever in the room at any given time. But running a government. Yeah. You know, and I just say it full out, like, these people are not my friends. I think they're fundamentally incorrect about seemingly all of their analyses. They're pathological by definition. It seems to me this woke worldview it's just the zealotry of the new age, you know, and they act as the modern inquisitors of our time, you know. And listen, I just say full out, fuck you. I'm not playing this game with these people at all for 1 second. I'm not going to have to I don't need to justify why I feel the way I do. You put the onus on them. Most of these people are fantastically uneducated. Like I said, you know, pathological by definition, and take some of the most bizarre positions imaginable. And I think in its finality, they're anti-civilization. Because if you listen to their rhetoric, it's not just that they think that we need to fix some of the historic injustices in our system. No, they say we need to tear the entire system down and rebuild it. So it's like the nature of the revolutionary. It needs to burn everything down before it's rebuilt. So it's important to listen to these people when they say this, right? And these things manifest themselves in slightly different ways depending on countries. They tend to manifest themselves in different ways depending on the country. In the United States, it may have to do with, you know, systemic racism and the history of slavery. In Canada, it may be the treatment of the indigenous peoples. You know, in the UK, it's about, you know, the empire that the colonial powers have just, you know, you understand what I mean. And you just have to say, it's like, you know what? I kind of quite like our civilization. The fact that we live in a society where we can live with peaceful streets and with some autonomy and a relative amount of freedom is an absolute miracle over the long scope of history, because most people lived in immiserated in filth and war and plague and famine and the rest of it. You know, the fact that we can live as peaceful and as prosperous as we have I think we should maybe try to hold on to that, maybe not burn the whole thing down once we're living in probably the most prosperous time in human history. But people like this, there's a tendency of people to think that we're always living in the worst time in human history. It's never been worse. It's always the midnight of the century. But it's like, no, if you actually, like, there's a gentleman by the name of Steven Pinker does some analysis on this. And he just says, well, actually, poverty has been alleviated by like some astronomical number. Much of the third world is now able to be fed. So maybe, they can start thinking about, you give somebody a handful of seeds, and some control over their life, the whole ground of the civilization goes up. So, I mean, a lot of, famine and poverty is starting to be alleviated. Now you have the counterforce of, the utopian types. People think we're going to save the fucking planet by banning some plastic straws. And limiting people's access to cheap energy while they fly around in private jets. They think, well, now that you get the third world, they're going to cut them off from having.
Well, wasn't it? I think it was COP28 or COP27. There was a total of, and I speak under correction on this, but I think it was something like 1,200 private jets that ferried the politicians in there, and then they want to tell us you're not allowed to go on holiday and fly economy more than once every couple of years because that's going to destroy the planet.
People, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And can you believe that these fucking people, like you said, they show up with their private jets, getting the most expensive hotels with these enormous delegations of people, because of course all these people are absolutely necessary, surely. And they come in to tell the rest of us that we need to not
be prepared to make changes in our lifestyles.
That's right. You have to make lifestyle changes so we can continue flying around in private jets, because I mean they don't even pretend to be hiding this agenda anymore. They what they want for themselves, they want to deny to the filth of the citizenry for which they're supposed to be representatives.
I think we're at the hour mark. You're just warming up now.
Yeah, we're just getting our trousers off.
Perfect day.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you're having a great interview and everything.
Yeah.
The thing is, your band is waiting for you.
Got a sound check.
Stuff on the guitar and the vocals.
Cool.
Could you give me a few minutes and I'll...
Yeah, we'll wait here for you.
Sure, okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll be back.
All right, brother.
Maybe.
Well, we were talking about, the escalation that's taking place on the side of the West, and I mean, even if you look at it from a completely politically agnostic perspective, you can't help but think there's something to it where this is, in America, this is an outgoing administration. They are literally lobbing America into a very potentially catastrophic conflict.
Sure.
And they'll have the media run cover for them in 6 months' time when it's gone completely to shit, and they go, oh, that's the guy that said no more war. Look at what he's done. It's unconscionable. You need us back.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of crazy what you're seeing, because for whatever you think of Trump, and everybody has an opinion, of course, yeah. I mean, anybody who's been paying attention, it's no surprise what ended up happening with the American election ended up the way that it did. Because you had, I mean, apart from anything else, obviously, Kamala Harris was a terrible candidate by
The worst.
By any objective measure was terrible. And it seemed like the whole political and bought and paid for media establishment was quite happy to say, just in the same way that they said that there was no cognitive decline in Joe Biden whatsoever.
Biden was the sharpest he's ever been.
Yeah, I mean, come on. It's like anybody who's been paying attention is that we're not babies. We're not fools to be spoken to in this way. So I think, what happened in the United States, maybe for a lot of Europeans don't quite understand it the same way. For English-speaking people, it maybe makes a little bit more sense. It's like I totally understand every criticism that is lobbed at Trump, and there are many. But at least with that in the election, there was a human being there. At least somebody didn't like as much of a, he might be a bullshit artist of the highest order, but at least there was a human being there. At least somebody seemed like there was a human being, because with Kamala Harris, it just seemed so manufactured and everything was so scripted, and that there might be some type of an informal, impromptu moment. It didn't seem like she was able to answer any question at all, which leads you to believe, what does this person believe in? And furthermore, who's actually running the show, if not
Well, she's taken vacation now. So I looked at the note when this came out, the story about taking a couple of weeks to herself. So you've got a president who's no longer Corpus Mentis. He's clearly not running the show.
No,
The person who would step in that situation and run the country on his behalf had been campaigning for president for over 100 days, so 3 months. And that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
So who is actually running the country? She's not even there now. She's on vacation.
Well, I mean, that should alarm any thinking person. That who is actually running the show? I mean, it's often said, the United States is not run by figureheads. It's run by shadowy, dark figures and things like the military-industrial complex and the intelligence agencies. And so forth, like the lobbyists. I mean, and there's certainly an argument to be made for that, and that's part of the appeal of what Trump was. He's going to drain the swamp. Sure, he said that the first time. He certainly wasn't able to do that, but there are people knew that they were being lied to.
Yeah.
Trump is more something of a symptom than a broader issue in the West, I think. In the United States, he's essentially the middle finger to the political establishment, in the same way that Brexit was a symptom of something of the same thing, a discontent amongst the people. And because what's been happening, I think, is that in the Western world, there's been a lot of policies that have not been given the consent of the governed. A big one is, and I've been talking about this, and it's becoming a louder issue, is the issue of mass migration into the Western world, because this is a massively destabilizing component. And if we don't talk about this as reasonable people, it will be left to the least reasonable and the last people on earth that you will want to be dealing with this. I mean, you're seeing this kind of everywhere. I mean, across Europe, and it's obviously shocking in Germany to see the AfD win elections in Thuringia and I believe in Saxony as well. So we get the media refers to them as a fascist party. I know whether or not that's true. I don't actually know. I know something about domestic politics in different countries, but what's happened in the Netherlands with the PVV. This is a very anti-immigrant party they're quite open about that. And I see that was happening in Austria. Some in Sweden. This is happening everywhere. Trump is kind of a symptom of all these things, because what happens if reasonable parties don't address legitimate concerns of the people in their countries? They're going to be left to more extreme political factions, and that's what's happening. And this is going to get a lot worse. I'm quite certain of it, because I think political establishments seem to look at the people who have legitimate concerns, whether you agree with them or not. They're legitimate concerns about identity and integration. There are issues about this that need to be addressed by reasonable voices. Otherwise, you're going to get scenes like you just had in the UK just after what happened with the murder of those young girls that, I guess, a Taylor Swift dance class, something like this. And if you don't want to see scenes of this kind, you don't want to see you don't want to have people being divided by racial lines. Of course not. What I mean? And in some sense, there's obviously religious lines. Some of these things are conflated together, because but that's a recipe for civil war. And you absolutely don't want this. And there has to be legitimate conversations about, legitimate levels of people coming into societies, right? Because it does present issues, So.
Well, Thomas, sorry to cut in, but Thomas Sowell, I think it was Thomas Sowell that said this. He was talking about immigration, and he said the consequences or the difficulties of mass migration is something that the government never deals with. So if you look at Canada, for example, it's perfectly reasonable for someone who sits in Canadian government to assess the demographic change in Canada and say, we've got a problem with aging. We need to replace the outgoing workforce somehow. However, you have to make provision for the fact that you're going to bring in over 1 million people in the space of a year, because if you don't do that, then you end up with a situation that you're in places like Toronto now, where I saw the other day in Toronto, a one-bed apartment costs well over $3,000. You know,
That's insane,
people are
yeah.
living 8 to a house because housing is so unaffordable, and everything else is unaffordable. Everything else is overstretched.
That's right, yeah.
You also don't have any plan from the government to properly assimilate the people that you bring into the country. And so those people then, therefore, you know, cluster together in slums. That leads to other social ills like crime. And then it becomes, exactly to your point, it becomes extremely easy for a bad actor to come in and say, hey, look, it's the fault of the immigrant that your life
You're right.
sucks.
It's because this is fertile soil for the demagogue to come in and present easy solutions. I mean, but of course, this is an issue, right? Because countries want to keep their GDP up. They want to look good on the world stage. But what's happening is you're having a collapse of people having families. People are not having kids. We're having increasing populations. We want to keep people paying taxes as the population ages. You bring in more people, but guess what? It's just a big pyramid scheme because these people get old too. You know what I mean? Before you know it, now you got everybody's old, and it's an issue that just it's going to keep compounding and making things worse. I mean, you look at a country like Canada. The sentiment against immigration in Canada has gone now into a majority viewpoint. That was unheard of. Canada was always a country that had kind of figured this out. We were able to integrate people from anywhere and everywhere in the world very successfully, and anybody from Canada could tell you that, you know. But in recent years, we are brought in so many people that, and they're all not going to the Northwest Territories. They're going to be coming to Toronto. They're going to go to Montreal. They're going to go to Vancouver. They're going to go to metropolitan centers. And what ends up happening is both the people that are coming here are getting screwed, and then the people who live here are getting screwed. As you have housing crises, and then you start to have animosity between groups. That's what happens, you know. Yeah. And so you want to have a bleeding heart all you want. It's great. You want to help people from around the world. That's why Canada was always a good place for this. We take people from anywhere, but when the numbers have become so extreme as to people can't even begin to start having families, they're essentially being rented into poverty because it's hitting critical mass, and it's making, when you start pressuring people so much, this is what, you're going to have a powder keg.
And you also have, I mean, the phrase is so cliche, but you've got the perfect storm of carbon taxes, and all the other ways in which the government is trying to fleece the populace.
Sure, yeah.
And this mass overreach, this oversized federal government that sits across everything. You've got that in the States, you've got that in Canada, you've got that over here. They make it so that, to your point, the ordinary citizen essentially is doomed to rent for the rest of their days. Yeah. Can never ever buy a house, will never become financially secure to a point where they can comfortably have a family and things like that. And then that leads to, now we need to replace the decrease in population with, people with migrants. They bring in the migrants. The migrants aren't necessarily doing anything bad. They're coming in because they're incentivized.
Of course not. Yeah. It's not their fault for wanting to come to a place. I mean,
but the government isn't doing anything to ensure that they're assimilated and that they're being brought in the correct way. I say this as an immigrant myself.
Sure. Yeah.
I grew up in South Africa. I've lived here for 22 years. But I mean, when I came in here, I knew, look, there's no getting any benefits. There's no getting any support. If you fuck up, you're on your own. Yeah, so I made sure that I took care of myself.
Well, I think that most people come here just grateful for the opportunity. I mean, which is, I think, is a good thing. I mean, you want a better life. I totally understand that, But if the solution cannot be for the Western world to absorb everyone, because that is a recipe for complete civil unrest, there's no question about it.
And you mentioned Germany and the AfD earlier. Paige and I were talking about that. We watched, I don't know if you know Tyler Oliveira. So he does this man on the street stuff on YouTube.
Really I got it.
He was interviewing people at a protest rally in, I think it was, I don't remember if it was Munich. It was somewhere in Germany.
Sure.
And I said to her, here's the problem. You've got people that are experiencing the worst outcomes of immigration.
Sure.
They're complaining. They're being told to shut up, and in some cases being threatened by the police and things like that. That builds resentment, and one of the
this is how the ratchet gets turned.
Exactly. Resentment leads to hatred. That's the one thing that I think so many people miss is when you start that cycle of resentment, ultimately that leads to hatred, and then you get to a point where it becomes us or them.
That's right. Well, of course, and then because its logical conclusion of this is that it does become an us and them, and then people are not having conversations anymore. You just have factionism, and that's a terrible result to have. You always want people. The conversation is always worth it for its own sake, and telling people who may or may not have legitimate concerns that they're Nazis or racists or the rest of it. All you're doing is building resentment. You're turning the ratchet, and this is going to get much worse unless people start having an honest conversation about this, right? Or like I said, you're going to get the last people on earth that you want to be dealing with these things will be I think it was David from, he was a speechwriter for George Bush Jr. He said, if the fascists are the only ones that will be willing to address the borders, then the people will vote for the fascists, and I pose it to anybody listening. Is that what you want? Or certainly we can come to a reasonable
moment. For the people that refer to Trump as a fascist, firstly, I think that's deepening ridiculous. The word. Secondly, I would say if you refer to him as a fascist based on his immigration policy, hold the Bill Clinton immigration policy and the Donald Trump immigration policy side by side.
They're almost identical.
And I'm about to say, tell me where you can see the difference.
Well, there's no difference because this is the reasonable policy. If you have a border, you have to secure it. I understand, in mainland Europe, the Schengen, and it works since.
Yeah.
But the United States is an enormous country. I mean, you're looking at 350 million people, and when you're having a lot of people coming from all around the world, because what's happening on the southern border it's insanity. And this is a big reason why Trump gets elected, because when you see the scenes of people flooding over the border, and not just that, but there's also like the fentanyl problem, which is it's much more. It's quite visible in almost any major American city. You can see it, and it's the zombification of people and the ruining of many people's lives. And it's terrible because anybody in the United States will say they probably know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who has been affected by this. Used to be heroin, used to be the thing that would scare you, but fentanyl, I assure you, I've seen it in my own eyes, is much more terrifying than anything you could possibly imagine. Seeing bodies contorted in ways that they should.
Yeah, you see those people that they stand on the street corners and they're bent over or hunched over. It's like some fucking Walking Dead shit.
Well, right, yeah, exactly. It's quite literally The Walking Dead. You have zombies in the streets, and I'm sympathetic to anybody who's ever had a drug addiction. It can be, especially to the people around you too, it can be just the worst imaginable scenario. But, like in Canada, it's like our solution is, well, we can't judge these people. Let me put Canada into a nutshell for you. You can do fentanyl in a public park, but you can't smoke on a patio. You understand? This is one of these, this is insanity. In many cases in Canada, they'll just give the drugs to drug users. I think we looked like the Portuguese model and said, we're going to implement this. We're going to decriminalize all drugs. But they didn't take the corollary to that, which was, if you get caught, you have to either go into mandatory treatment or you take prison time. We left that part out, and it's just exacerbated the drug problem.
Do you see that video of Pierre Poilievre tearing that reporter to pieces who was talking to him about, not the Apple, which was genius. That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Yeah, the other one was around safe injection sites. And he's like, okay, is it a safe injection site when a mother and her child is walking by one of the sites and they get shot? Yeah. Because some guy has just injected himself on drugs and he's got a gun and he's firing it randomly.
Yeah. Well,
and the guy was just gobsmacked.
Which actually did happen.
Yeah.
It's like something happened in Toronto. It actually happened. Because what's happening is that around these quote unquote safe injection sites is that you're going to get obviously the people who are drug users, but you're going to get the predatory dealers that go around. We were having these tent encampments, and once they started actually ripping the tent encampments up, the things they found inside were just unbelievable, Because obviously, people are being preyed upon, especially young women, apart from anything else. I think, as a man in society, it's, if your sword does not shine in an instant seeing a woman being abused, then I would argue you're by no definition a man whatsoever. But the things that they found was just, because what was happening is that the police are not going in there. because you have people who are also saying we love our neighbors in tents. You know what I mean? You get these type of people who, you know, live in $1 million houses, but they want to have their virtue signaling halos on full display. We just don't want them in, you know, well, if you want them, put them in your front yard. You know, of course not. They don't want them anywhere near them.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of public pressure that it was dehumanizing people who are experiencing homelessness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These ridiculous terms, you know. Experiencing homelessness. No, they're homeless and they're addicted to drugs and they're ghettoized into tent communities where predatory people are preying upon the vulnerable. That's what it is. It's just called for what it is. I mean, we shouldn't be putting up with it. I don't think it should be controversial to say something like that, you know. People need to be given help.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, and it can be anybody who's ever dealt with somebody who has serious drug addiction will say it's very difficult to help people who don't necessarily want to be helped, you know.
Yeah.
There could be an argument to be made that, you know, they have to be forced into some type of rehabilitation. But again, you know, you get into issues of human rights at that point, which is always what makes these things kind of difficult.
But that's, again, it's, you know, people respond based on the incentive that's there. You know, there was this argument made once, not too long ago, actually. I saw an article where somebody was, you know, a writer on the left was saying, or a journalist actually, you know, they were looking at Singapore and they were saying, oh, you know, why can't American society be this way? And somebody quite rightly pointed out, it's because you're not willing to pay the price to be that way.
Sure.
There's a price that you pay. If you fuck up in Singapore, you get the Singapore cane. I mean, you know, the police do not mess around there. There's a big sign up in the airport saying, if you are caught with drugs, there's the death penalty.
You're fucked.
Yeah. So, you know, like if you want to have that kind of society, there's a price that comes with that.
Yeah, and of course, you're always trying to balance, obviously, civil liberties against safety. And I mean, I tend to lean quite heavily into the camp of personal freedom. I'd like to be able to have the freedom to make my own mistakes. Allow me the autonomy and the responsibility that comes with being a free citizen, or quote unquote free citizen in a responsible society. I mean, you make your mistakes, you pay the price, you pay the piper, or what have you. But what I don't like seeing is the abandoning of the principles that made our societies flourish in the first place. That's kind of, I think, probably the crux of it, right?
So I think you and I are quite similar in this regard. I'm curious to get your take on this, because I feel like over the last 15 years, so my background is I grew up in a quite liberal home. You know, my parents were pretty vocal and pretty active when it came to, you know, going to rallies to, you know, protest Mandela being in prison.
Sure, yeah.
You know, so all of that sort of stuff. I grew up with that and with that awareness of politics and considered myself to be a part of the left for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Where I started to lose faith and confidence in anything political was during the Iraq War.
Sure.
And then as time progressed, I kind of felt like all of my views had more or less stayed the same. I think there was some that I possibly sharpened up on a little bit here and there, but they most of my positions were relatively unchanged, and it felt like the window for somebody who was mostly in the center went like this.
Yeah, the Overton window had shifted,
and it moved dramatically.
Yeah,
and I don't think that I'm alone. I mean, Jesus Christ! If you want to see the most incredible example of that, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks left the Democrats very publicly a couple of weeks ago.
And frankly, I consider him to be something of a blowhard. You know what I mean?
Oh, he's a complete fucking idiot.
He's an absolute.
But I mean, when he says, "Oh, this isn't for me anymore," then you know something. Something major has happened.
I think what's happened is, and people have started to speak up about this because it almost seemed like it was like morally irresponsible to disagree with anything that may be considered a like part of the left-wing zeitgeist. Because I'm a Canadian. We all kind of grew up center left, kind of liberal, live and let live. We're always very open to everyone. We still are an open people by any objective standard. But it just kept seeming like what was the consensus kept moving further and further left. And people were saying, what the fuck's going on here? I haven't changed my opinion. But the zeitgeist kept getting increasingly pathological and unreasonable and exclusive, frankly, because they were it's beginning to exclude more and more people for increasingly, maybe boutique is not the right word, but identitarian issues, it seemed.
Champagne liberalism.
Champagne socialism is
Yeah.
It's just the type of people who they live in the big homes and they drive the big vehicles, but they still want to feel morally virtuous, right?
Yeah.
Being some knuckle dragging conservative or something like that. I mean, I guess that's also changing because I guess that's the nature of like how politics works. Is that the pendulum swings back and forth, and when the left is starting to go too far, the proverbial pendulum kind of swings back. The problem with the pendulum is that if it somehow the wind starts to blow a little too hard on one side and it goes much farther left, it's going to come back much farther right.
Yeah.
And that's not desirable. You want to keep things within the reasonable parameters of reasonable people, lest we end up in situations of political extremism, which go obviously both ways,
And I think that's an important point to make for anybody watching this who doesn't know the podcast.
Yeah.
Because when you and I spoke last time, we were talking quite scathingly about vaccine mandates and things like that. And I had people in the comments talking about, I'd love to hear their thoughts on climate change. And we literally went from, hey, I don't like when somebody tells me I have to inject something in my body that I have no idea what the side effects are long term.
Sure, yeah.
To he's a climate change denier, and oh, by the way, he's probably a Hitler fanatic. It's Jesus Christ. It's like, dude, I consider myself still to be reasonably centrist.
Oh, sure. I mean, I consider myself to be as well. I think I've been trying to make the argument that don't want politics to be swaying so far in either direction. Whereas the most undesirable people on every side are kind of the least scrupulous, the least inquisitive, the loudest people who are the least informed to be so vociferous about these opinions, right? I'm trying to appeal to the center. I think a lot of people, I think you and I probably would agree on this, trying to appeal to the center because there's the obvious pitfalls of what happens when you don't maintain the center ground.
Yeah.
But I know what you're talking about, right? It's like, well, I mean, look, about COVID, I mean, I thought my instincts were been correct about that. It's like it starts off, it was, frankly, I'm not quite ready to forgive the powers that be or the forces that will for what they did during that time.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
45 minutes, the wrong. We're just getting on to COVID.
Amazing.
Because what happened during that period, and I think we discussed this a little bit last time, but it starts off as being, okay, we have a novel virus. It starts with, you're not sure what the potential ramifications of this could be. So, I mean, I know my initial reaction was shit. I mean, I've read a little bit about the Black Death, and I mean, who knows if it's going to be anything like that. But I mean, we'll be responsible in our behavior. But it only took me about a few weeks to figure, something's not fucking right here.
Yeah.
As soon as things because I think most reasonable people could probably see there's some things that did not make sense. The masks were bullshit. Social distancing was bullshit. There's no scientific basis for that, and the FDA and CDC has admitted so. The vaccines did not stop the spread. Then the European Commission, after asking Pfizer, admitted as such. We didn't even do any research as whether or not it did stop the spread. And everything that we were told in that period was essentially a lie, and it was manipulated by a big pharmaceutical industry, which it wouldn't do anything like start an opioid crisis, for example. And what it did what I think what affected me the most with that time period was how it made your fellow man, your neighbor, treat their fellow man. And a lot of people don't want to talk about this period. You bring it up, they say, "Oh, that's whatever. It's over. We don't want to talk about it anymore." Yeah. Because perhaps you may have referred to your neighbor or your family member as a plague rat or a second-class citizen, who it was justified in removing from them their civil liberties and rendering them a second-class citizen. I think that's appalling, and I'm not ready to forgive the powers that be that allowed that to happen. This happened in Canada, for example. We weren't allowed to get on a train or a plane if we weren't vaccinated. Well, that's part of the reason we ended up going to that protest. And still, people say, "Oh, these Panzerfaust, these guys are fucking idiots. Why would they go to like a right-wing protest?" It wasn't right.
Oh, they called it the Nazi rally.
Yeah, you know what? Listen, I don't apologize. You don't apologize when you've done nothing wrong. We went there to protest authoritarianism and government overreach and for supporting bodily autonomy. To tell me or anybody else there that it was something of a right-wing rally shows you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. You just don't know. You could not be more wrong about that. I mean, the people that, of course, are the most opinionated about this, about our presence there, are the people that know the least about it. I mean, these are just fantastically unscrupulous people. And despite what you say, like the first comment we made the statement was, the fact that they need to make a statement at all is just further proof that they are, in fact, we're accusing them of being. So get the fuck out of here. You know, you can't win an argument like that. You just make your peace and let people come up with their own silly opinions. I still will never apologize for that. It was one of the. I was very proud of my boys for going with me to do this, and I don't think we've ever been the same. I think we learned something about media manipulation when we were there. We could see with our own eyes, because we went there. We had heard, okay, there might be like some mumblings about this might have some unsavory elements around the fringes. So we said, you know what? We didn't think the media was going to tell us the honest truth. So let's just go there and see it with our own eyes. I mean, it's probably the most jubilant thing. It was the most essentially Canadian protest. You know, it's minus 35 fucking degrees outside. Everybody's smiling and laughing and dancing. And there's people of all ages, of all backgrounds. Despite what they say, it was some type of a white. That could not be further from the truth. And people out there in the freezing cold just wanting to be heard. And it's a very difficult protest for a government to deal with because there's no violence. They're all following the law. They're looking after it. They're shoveling the streets. I mean, it's so quintessentially Canadian that's to be almost like comical, right? And then they said, well, if you're bringing fuel for the trucks so they can fill up their trucks, we'll arrest you. So what do people do? Everybody start walking fuel canisters, some being full, some being empty. You can't stop all of us. Very hard to stop a protest that's playful and jubilant in that way. So, well, ultimately what they just did is they sent in the riot squads and crushed it. So, look,
by the way, the people that were pointing to the unsavory elements that were there are completely discounting the fact that the government are almost certainly capable of sending a couple of folk in there to make it look particularly unsavory.
Agent provocateur.
Say, hey, CBC, make sure you got the cameras trained on those guys because it's clearly a Nazi rally. The worst is that people called it the Trump rally.
Yeah, right.
That was the most insane
I think
thing.
what it was. I think they said that it was. First, they said it was being influenced by Russia, or being Russian funded, and then they went and said that this was actually MAGA forces in the United States funding a rally in Ottawa. Yeah, as a Canadian, most Americans don't give a shit about Canada, and they don't really have any reason to. Most like Americans you speak to know almost nothing about Canada, and that's okay. I mean, Canada's kind of a boring, more or less insignificant country, and that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But to think that some nefarious MAGA forces are somehow funding a protest in Ottawa. So, I mean, these things are laughable. I mean,
Trump's way of playing a prank on Trudeau.
Right, yeah. I mean, exactly, yeah. But, so, I mean, again, we still kind of get flack for that, but I make absolutely no apology whatsoever.
No, nor should you. And I do feel like there's at least an element of the tide turning. I think the American election, to me, where I felt the biggest shift was after Trump went on Joe Rogan. And then a lot of people started coming out, and people started speaking more freely. And I just think people basically said, part of this election is we are fucking sick and tired of your bullshit.
Yeah, but I think you're quite right. I mean, if anything, I think that podcast probably did win the election, despite the fact that the seemed a little bit suspicious that YouTube seemed to be burying it.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, this is part of the reason people vote for Trump in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because you're fucking with us and we can see it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, for me, I was a Bobby Kennedy guy myself.
Yeah.
And the fact that he had brought in people like Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk, obviously.
I mean, the whole lineup of former Democrats. That's the thing that's so fucking funny.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing. I remember saying to Tommy, our bass player, just said, do you think that Trump actually might be the unity candidate? I know it sounds so bizarre because he's such a divisive figure, but, you know, irony is a funny way of playing out in the world, right? And this was, I think, a perfect example of that. So, yeah, seeing that, you know, former Democrats, disenfranchised Democrats, Kennedy Democrats, for Christ's sake, you know, coming to join the Trump administration. I think that did change for a lot of people because I was not like a particular Trump guy by any means. I tried to keep objectively removed from politics, but there are, you know, remember Bobby Kennedy saying, you know, there are fates worse than death. There are fates far worse than death. Talking about being in a world where the censorship industrial complex could lie to you and you wouldn't even know it, you know. They could deny for you information and they could have, we're living in the world of AI now where they have the power to essentially surveil any person anywhere, any given time, and you'll happily accept it. You don't even know you're doing it. I mean, you used to think that privacy meant something, but we openly accept this with every app we open, every algorithm we subject ourselves to. And you have to ask yourself, okay, why do I believe these things? I have to ask this myself. You know, you see how the algorithm can manipulate the way that you think. I have to ask myself, and I think everybody has to ask themselves, are my a priori assumptions about the world just having confirmation bias, reinforcing me to believe even more indiscriminately, or like again, you just have to question the things that are being told. The algorithms, they're telling you what you want to hear, or they're preying upon your fears. It's important for every person to question, okay, why do I feel the way that I do? Am I being objective about this, or perhaps am I being manipulated?
Yeah. I think the way you inoculate yourself against that, at least in part, it's your best shot of doing so, is by having policy positions of your own, thought out policy positions of your own. Yeah. And what I was always taught is when you decide who you're going to vote for, you look at your policy positions, then you go, okay, these are the options. This is the person most closely aligned to my thinking. You will never, ever get a perfect candidate. You vote for the person who's essentially the least worst option.
Sure. I mean, I think for most people they're single issue voters. That's what most people, I think, vote upon. I mean, of course, yeah. I mean, if you're an honest person, everybody understands, you should understand that every person has two sets of books. There are cognitive dissonance in every person, seemingly conflicting views in people's heads, and you should admit that. You know, dogmatism is the problem, and especially dogmatism based on someone else's opinion about something, right? Because a lot of people who seem to be the most vociferous and most vocal about their grievances are people who've probably not read anything, that they haven't read and couldn't read the things that they are supposedly so vehemently opposing. You know, I just laugh at some of these people, you know what I mean? The, self-described Marxists, he's sitting this on the couch. Well, I'm a communist. Is that right? You know? And I said, well, no, I'm a Marxist. I'm more of a Hegelian. I said, get the fuck out of my face.
Well, when they say I'm an anti-racist and a communist, or an anti-racist and a Marxist, you go, do you know what Karl Marx thought?
Yeah, have you read
anyone who wasn't white?
Reading on Karl Marx? You know what I mean? You might be surprised to see what you may have thought about the people you're supposedly being allies with, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't even have to read that far, but it just goes to show they haven't read anything.
Well, again, most of them just go off, a headline and that's it.
Well, of course, and it's also like, the Socratic method still works. Don't get upset with someone saying a stupid opinion. Just ask them a couple simple questions. you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves with it. And I guarantee it every single time. And I know this from experience. I know it from experience. I do it quite often, you know. So because I'm the person I love. I'm like one of those people who's in love with argument. I like having the debate. I think the conversation is worth it for its own sake. And you can usually tell pretty quick when a person starts to implode and starts to get a little bit loud and unreasonable. And as soon as you question their credentials, I don't think is the right word, but question some of their sources or whether or not you believe they've actually read anything they claim to believe in, they start to get hysterical in the same way that a child will react in a explosive way when you catch them in a lie, right? So it's fun. To me, it's a little bit kind of like child's play, but I enjoy it nevertheless.
So bringing it back to music, and we can close off here because I know you need to go in a sec. What is next? You've scaled this unbelievable mountain. I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording. The audience size at these shows you guys are playing now is big. I really feel like the Panzerfaust profile is increasing exponentially.
I sure hope you're correct.
Where do you go from here?
I mean, it's a good question. I wouldn't necessarily attribute the large audiences of this tour to us. I think probably more Canonical were doing the heavy lifting there because they're on a meteoric rise. I don't think people quite understand it yet, but you'll see it happening pretty soon. But it's a good question because I think next year is going to be our 20th anniversary as a band, which is, I think it's no small feat being able to do something consistently for 20 years. I guess it can take some personal pride in being able to keep something together that long. I think we're trying to focus more on how we're going to take the music we just wrote and apply it to a live setting. Because I think, without sounding like self-righteous or anything like that, but I just mean, I think it's important to see Panzerfaust as a live band because what we do live is a manifestation of all of. It's just important to see it live if you want to get the full experience. Let's say. We're trying to find the best way that we can present it in a way that does the whole Suns of Perdition series justice. And then, I mean, I can already feel like there's that engine in the back of my head starting to write new things. I already start writing down little things, and you get, the instinct of a new idea. So I'm not entirely sure. I know I know we want to tour this quite extensively because, it would be kind of silly to do this massive 4-chapter project and then all of a sudden you're like, well, let's just start a new record.
Well, what you guys have achieved here actually lends itself to so many different, like really interesting things. I mean, you could do something incredibly visual to go with the music, as an example. Like when we were driving down today, I was listening to the new album in the car and I was sitting thinking to myself, fuck, you could do like essentially an entire movie scored to this music. You wouldn't necessarily have all 4 chapters. You're talking about probably like 3.5 hours worth of music.
It'll be a long movie. It's only a 3 hours sort of film,
But you could do something incredibly interesting and something quite unique with it. So
yeah, but we have a guy, the guy that we Benji Irwin, is the guy we did the Promethean Fire video with. Him and I had like a really good working relationship and like directing, and while me doing directing, he's director of photography. There was some really good synchronicity there. So I have been in contact with him about doing something. I think it probably does deserve some visual elements of some kind. I'm not entirely sure how that goes yet, because that Promethean Fire video was something of a Herculean labor to get that done. It was no joke, and I couldn't possibly have done it without him. So when we get back, I'm going to probably have to sit down and have some conversations with him about some potential ideas, because there are some visual ideas that I'd like to take advantage of before, the iron is hot, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, it's there's been a lot of ideas, there's a lot of options, but you need to only compartmentalize things so big. I think very deeply about the project at hand, and I will have a subconscious thinking what's the next thing. So then once I finish that one thing, I'll put that away and then start on the next, right? so as to not, stretch ourselves too thin, But yeah, we're gonna see. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but I got some ideas.
You guys need to get together. Katie and I were talking about this. You and Nas need to get together. Achilles and Panzerfaust.
Is that right?
Headlining tour, storming the US.
I mean, honestly, I'm a big fan of theirs, and I would love to do that. And I haven't actually had a chance to meet them personally, but I think we'd probably get along quite well.
Yeah,
I'm sure it'll happen at some point. I think we were supposed to play Maryland Death Fest together. I think
you guys would have been at that Tel Aviv show together.
That's right. They were playing that as well. Yeah. So unfortunately, we just haven't been able to meet each other yet. But I mean, I'm a big fan of the music, so I think it would be a pretty terrifying package.
Dude, that would be fucking insane.
So we'll see what happens. I mean,
if you really want to drive people over the edge, get my friends Spelgoth and Horner to join.
Yeah, don't get it. You know what I mean? Just, what I mean? Break the internet.
Banned in all states.
Yeah. We don't call it banned on all fronts.
Well, dude, on over here in the UK, I had to go see Destroyer 666 at a secret location.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it was them, Necro Ritual, and a couple of other bands. They announced they're playing, and then if you bought a ticket, then they emailed you the location like an hour before the time. The funniest thing about it was,
underground.
Oh, dude, it was very underground. But the funniest thing about this was, it's a gay bar, and they seem to be having the fucking time of their lives. Everyone who's working there,
sure,
the campus people you can imagine. Paige, who she's not of the scene, so she kind of observes things from a very external perspective.
Sure.
She was like, "This is probably the most chilled, positive vibe I've seen at a metal show." And yeah, like I said,
well, is it not the case? It's always the supposed anti-fascists who come in acting like brown shirts and start saying right in the name of anti-fascism. I mean, it's kind of Destroyer 666 has done some things where maybe a little controversial, maybe had a little too much to drink. But I mean, I met those guys before. They're cool guys,
I met KK and I thought he was fucking hysterical.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of like, I guess maybe it's like if you're part of the English-speaking world, you kind of understand this type of like rather abrasive humor, maybe in a way that some people don't, And
no, he was exactly what you hope he'll be. He gets introduced to me and like, oh, you Jackie from Into the Necrosphere. I'm like, yeah. He says, I listen to your podcast. I said, you should come on the podcast at some point. Nah, mate, you don't want me on the podcast.
Yeah. He's the type of guy. And he's kind of like a man's man type of guy, Yeah, when you say something maybe controversial, guess what? We all say things that are controversial. This is fucking black metal, for Christ's sake, it's something to not be controversial. If you're making art, your job is to rock the goddamn boat. Otherwise, you're not doing anything of any significance. So yeah, but he's a funny guy. I met him one time. I see him. He looks at me and goes, "You look like Jax from Sons of Anarchy." I go, "Oh fuck." Said thanks for the compliment. We got along great, but yeah.
Dude, thank you so much.
Oh, dude,
this was
my pleasure.
What a fucking blast to finally get to do this in person.
Yeah, I'm happy we finally got to do it in person.
We can probably go several hours more, but we'll do another one of these again at some point.
100%. I'll always be happy to. I'm glad we got to do it in person, and then let's have a couple beers afterwards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe we can smoke outside, so we don't have to do this fucking thing. You know what I mean?
Awesome. All right,
sounds good. Cheers, mate.
The Damascene Conversions by Panzerfaust off their brand new, stunning album, Suns of Perdition, Chapter 4 to Shadow Zion, a definite shortlist for one of the best albums of 2024, available right now on Eisenwald Records. Link to the Panzerfaust Bandcamp in the description to the podcast. And if you haven't heard it yet, I strongly suggest that you change that immediately. I want to say thank you very much, not only to Brock, but also to the rest of the band. I got to meet them after their set. Consummate gentlemen who were just so nice to myself and to Paige. And, I certainly look forward to the next conversation that I have with Brock, because that is inevitable. We could have carried this on very easily for another 2 or 3 hours. Being there face-to-face in person just adds a different dynamic to the chat. And he's just a great dude. Somebody that I just instantly connected with, considered to be a friend. And I certainly hope that you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did recording it. Right now, my friends, if you're like Sharon Stone and you choose to self-declare your IQ like the rest of us should give a fuck, then grab the closest electric scooter and hit the bricks, because this is my weekly news rant.
A roundabout for judgment. And hang them where the world can see.
Kicking us off, as always, metalstorm.net, the finest metal news website in all the land, undefeated and undisputed. Nexion have dropped a brand new single. It says here, Iceland-based melodic black and death metal purveyors Nexion are streaming their newest standalone single titled Gander. The song was mixed and mastered by a gentleman who I shan't insult by attempting to pronounce his name. It was recorded at Hertz Studios, and the vocals were mixed by Kjell Bratten. I love me some Icelandic black metal. I am astonished, and will remain so for the rest of my life, that a country with 398,000 citizens, literally less than probably 2 or 3 neighborhoods in London, can churn out extreme music of the quality and volume that Iceland is apparently able to. But anyway, let's not proselytize about Iceland too much. Let's hear what Nexion sounds like. So here's a fun fact for you. Christian Godmundsen, who plays drums on this song, is the live drummer for Solstafir this year. I don't know whether that's a permanent arrangement or not, but Metal Archives credits it as being from 2024 onwards. It's one of the first things that I pick up in this song, and it is magnificent. And then, funnily enough, everything else about the song I find magnificent also. Vocals by Josh Rood, unbelievable. The riffing is killer. I love, just coming back to those vocals, I love those kind of chanting, almost ritualistic vocals. They remind me a little bit of a French black metal band named Malapest, who did a incredible split EP with another French black metal band called Dissolum. And yeah, I can't remember the name off by heart. It's something French. If you look it up on Metal Archives, or you look up either band on Metal Archives, you'll be able to track it down. But I strongly recommend you check that out. Actually, with Dissolum, they did an album back in 2015, I think it was, called Occultation, masterpiece. Unequivocal masterpiece. Much like this song. The other thing that I've noticed as I'm scoping out these guys on Metal Archives is that they are unsigned, and I find that flabbergasting. This is so much better than a very significant proportion of bands we've listened to on this news rant who are signed by not insignificantly sized labels. I can only assume that they are unsigned by their own decision, but either way, if I worked in A&R on any label, particularly a label like Deborah Morty Productions, these guys would be signed immediately. This, so far, my friends, is it's inching towards not only a top-notch award, but a BTN award, the rarely given BTN Beyond Top-Notch award. That chanting just sounds so sick. I'm reminded now, Nexion put out an album in 2020 called Seven Oracles, and again, as I was looking at it, that album cover was immediately familiar to me. I know I listened to that record and absolutely loved it, but I haven't really revisited it for a while, and I mean, that's just a byproduct of how much good music comes out every single weekend. Definitely going to need to go back to it, though. That was out on Avant-Garde Music, so who knows? They might be. I don't know whether that was just a one album deal, and they just kind of putting out a little taster single to see if they can attract attention from other labels. But either way, Seven Oracles, their debut 2020 full-length album, one to revisit. This song, beyond top notch, absolutely fantastic. But again, just with regards to Icelandic black metal, you can name off the top of your head probably, and we'll probably come up with different lists if we were sat down, having a beer, having a cold one, and just shooting the shit. But just like 5 great Icelandic black metal bands off the top of my head. Mr. Ming, one of the best Icelandic black metal bands, one of the best black metal bands, period. If you've never seen them live, something that you absolutely need to do yourself a favor and change, because they're probably one of the best live black metal bands on planet Earth right now. Altari, Sunmara, Hellfro, Almirkmi, genius bands, all of them. So that band or that country is just blessed with a wealth of riches when it comes to great musicians who just seemingly live for the darkness, and I love it. Okay, Cobra Smell have launched a new music video. The Dutch-Spanish female metal crew Cobra Spell, known henceforth on this podcast as Cobra Smell, have debuted a brand new video for Love Crime. Their previous song was a crime to my eardrums. I'm not going to inflict that on you guys again. Another thing that's a crime to my eardrums, All for Metal have premiered the All for Metal is Coming to Town single. I despise when metal bands do Christmas songs. And it's bad enough when they do Christmas-themed songs, but when they do covers of shitty Christmas songs that we're inflicted with 99% of the time from November the 15th through to January the 1st, I can't deal with it. I absolutely hate it. I mean, All for Metal is such a fucking joke. It's boggles the mind how anybody could listen to that nonsense, but clearly they've got an audience, and clearly there's an audience for stupid, pretend pseudo-quirky covers of Christmas songs, which to me that's the preserve of Dee Snider, and it's also the preserve of people that have IQs of 72 and below. Tormented Tyrant have debuted their next full-length, their debut full-length, I should say. Finnish death metalers Tormented Tyrant are pleased to unveil details and a first single in connection with their debut full-length announcement dubbed Excessive Escalation of Cruelty. It'll be set free by Everlasting Spew Records on January the 24th, 2025. Recording, engineering, and mixing was handled by the band's bassist, M. Malignant. Keen to hear what this sounds like because M. Malignant, if I'm not mistaken, is also a member of Pestilent Hex. And Pestilent Hex this year put out a pretty goddamn sensational record. I am going to very quickly remind myself of the name of that album, and then I will sound much more intelligent than I actually am. The Sorceries of Sanguine and Shadow. If you haven't listened to that yet, you also need to change that very quickly. But that being said, let's hear what Tormented Tyrant sounds like. That's the kind of groove that's going to give you the stank face when you listen to it. Great stuff. Nothing particularly new brought to the table. There is a very clear worship of bands like Malevolent Creation, Morbid Angel, and Deicide, but for my money, the execution is what makes this work. Unlike some of the shite that we've listened to, or that at least we've explored over the last couple of news rants, where it's old school worship that just literally sounds like mimicry. This doesn't sound like mimicry. This sounds like a loving tribute, and I think it just works really, really well. Very aggressive, very heavy. Nice, thick, meaty production. And it's kind of what you would expect from musicians of this caliber. I mentioned that M. Malignant is in Pestilent Hex. He's also in, I think the band's name is Corpsed, and then he's in Prophetess. He's in a band called Tyranny, and the other guys are in bands as well. So, they're clearly seasoned heads. They know their shit, and it is very evident on the song. So another top-notch, I think. Not beyond top-notch in this instance, but a top-notch all the same. Let's get to a question or two before we move on to the next track. Konstantinos.9889 asks, Dream interview guests, Mortis, Hetfield, J-Dog, Fenris, any chance? I can take them one by one. Mortis, I think, is a definite no. He is friends with Alan Averill of Primordial, and I actually asked Alan about him the last time that we spoke, and he said, because we were talking back and forth about who he could get on his podcast and, who I would like to have on my show, and he said he had already tried to get Mortis on the show, and he's just not interested. Doesn't like doing interviews, doesn't do podcasts, apparently, and this is pretty evident from the way he conducts himself, doesn't really like people, period. So, yeah, I don't see that happening. Morgan from Marduk, that I do see happening, and it is most definitely a goal for next year. Ideally, if I can be at a show that he's playing at, and I can do something face-to-face, that'll be incredible. But either way, I'm gonna try and make Morgan happen next year. But Mortis, no. Hetfield, definite no. I would love to have him on the show. I think anybody in my position would love to have James Hetfield on the show. I think the number of gatekeepers and the number of hoops that I would need to jump through to make that happen, or just to have a shot at making that happen, would be nigh on impossible. And besides, I mean, I think if there's not a there's not an M after the viewership figure on YouTube, he's not interested for obvious reasons in being on that podcast. J-Dog, 100%. I'd love to have him on the show. He's got a open invite whenever he wants to be on Into the Necrosphere. I think his YouTube channel is hysterical, and I think he's a good dude. Fenris, maybe, who knows? I've never really tried to pursue getting him on the podcast. I know a few people that could possibly pull some strings, but yeah, who knows? I think of everybody that you mentioned, the one I would love to personally get on the podcast most would be Mortus. But as I said, I don't see that happening, sadly. All right, we'll do one more. Planet Metal BJJ asks, what are my favorite workout tracks? He also has a follow-up question. Can the Wallabies, otherwise known as the Australian rugby team for my non-rugby watching friends, be a threat with their newfound confidence? My favorite workout tracks tend to be old school, real man's hardcore. I like simplistic, very testosterone heavy music when I'm lifting weights. So Stamping Ground, Pain is Weakness Leaving the Body, Biohazard, Urban Discipline. What else? Let me take a look. Let me consult the playlist, because I actually have a playlist with everything on. Certainly something by Terror would have to be on that list. I think the title track off their 25th Hour record, to me, that's a complete masterpiece. One I've been listening to a lot, and I rave about this band constantly, is Spirit World. The track that I'm particularly fond of for listening to when I'm at the gym, Lujuria Satanica, absolutely brilliant. And then if I had to choose one more, one thing I would say is I don't really like listening to black metal and not really much death metal either, unless it's something like Dying Fetus when I'm working out, because I find that music is too complex to get me doing what I need to do. Like black metal to me is music I listen to when I'm working, or it's music I'll listen to when I'm sat down in front of the hi-fi properly listening to music. But I feel like it's music that requires at least a bit more attention. But certainly, like, I don't want a bunch of racket and noise and stuff in the background when I'm training. Oh, actually, not hardcore, but Black Magic by Slayer. How can you not want to work out to that? And then the next question, can the Wallabies be a threat with their newfound confidence? Yes. Australia, as a sporting nation, have a indomitable spirit. And I think in South Africa, the assumption is always that no matter what their form has been in the run-up to every World Cup, the Wallabies are always going to be a force at the World Cup. They're always dangerous. And I think there's enough that's happened in these games that they played in the Northern Hemisphere in November that I see the green shoots of recovery there, without a doubt. They just need to get a couple of bigger boys into the team to take care of the grunt up front. And I think the rest will take care of itself, because as far as backline players, they absolutely spoiled for choice there. Detest deliver a new single called Bullet Rain, with a new single in the pipeline, A World Drowning in Detest, to be released on December the 6th. Sorry, a new album on the pipeline, I should have said. Danish death metal band Detest present the second and last single called Bullet Rain. Let's hear what it sounds like. That is fucking duller than dishwater. Detest have apparently been around since 1990. They put out their first album in 1994 and then were out of commission up until 2019. And then they put out 2 albums in the last 5 years. We Will Get What We Deserve in 2021 and A World Drowning in Detest due out for release in 2024. To me, that just sounds like a band stuck in the early 90s, and you can understand quite quickly why in the early 90s they were never recognized amongst the elite of the elite. Like, to me, this is, there's the elite tier, then there's the B tier. Like, I would say the elite tier of the early 90s, it's pretty straightforward and very unpredictable, frankly. Not unpredictable, sorry, very predictable. It's Obituary, Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Deicide, Death. If we look at Europe, Entombed, Dismember, Bolt Thrower. And then you've got like the B tier. The B team almost certainly would have had to include Malevolent Creation. Trying to think who else would go in there. They're the first names that come to mind. And then you've got the C team. This barely makes the C team. I would go as far as to say this actually, frankly, wouldn't make the team at all. This is the fat kid who stands in the corner, and is only picked because you've run out of players to select for the team. I don't know who's going to be into that kind of music in 2024, but I certainly wouldn't be. Panzerchrist have put out a brand new track. I fucking loved the last Panzerchrist album. And very surprisingly, they've got a brand new one coming out. It says here, a week before their new LP, Maleficium Part 1 hits the streets, blackened death metal ensemble Panzerchrist offering listening the last single in advance of that album coming out called Blood Leeches. Let's hear what it sounds like. That's going to be the third top-notch award dished out this week. And I'm not just handing them out for the sake of handing them out, but, credit where credit is due. This is brilliant. Last of a Kind, the previous Panzerchrist record that came out in 2023, that really was one of the biggest surprises of last year, without a doubt. This is a band that also has roots going all the way back to the earlier-ish 90s. Never really a band that featured very high up on my radar, but since they introduced Sonia Roseland as their vocalist, I feel like she's just helped elevate this band and just given them a new shot in the arm. I mean, I know that they took a fairly lengthy hiatus, nearly 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then when they came back, really, they were Panzer General, the drummer, and a bunch of new people. But, I mean, this new iteration of Panzerchrist put out one great record, and it sounds like they got an absolutely fantastic second record in the works. So, top-notch for me, no doubt. Everything about this, it's angry, it's convincing. I love the kind of horror. Almost reminds me a little bit of the Exorcist's soundtrack, the Exorcist's score at the beginning of the song, and it just helps set this kind of very unnerving tone. It creates this tension, and then when the song kicks in, it's just pure fucking bile, and I love it, absolutely love it. Let's give it another 60 seconds. And that part that we just heard now just elevated the song even more. So this might be the first time that I ever do this, but I think 2 BTNs are about to be awarded this week. That's beyond top notch. Like that opening part of the track, the like ambient horror intro. Then you've got this old school raw ripping black metal, and then it goes into this fucking crazy, dark, atmospheric, warlike, avant-garde vibe. Fucking brilliant. Once again, and I don't want to keep fucking beating a dead horse about this, but it comes out on December the 6th, and very weirdly, I don't see it featured on any best of lists. Now, it could be that these studious individuals who have been putting out their best of 2024 lists got the promo and just thought, well, it's not quite the new Spirit Box record or that new Sleep Token album. But kind of proves my point. You wait until the end of the year, because there is good stuff. Certainly for the last couple of years has been the case. Good stuff from the beginning of the year to the very end. Cannot wait to hear that new Panzerchrist album. That song is fucking brilliant. Okay, let's do a few more questions. So this is a pretty lengthy one, but I think it actually fits in quite nicely to the conversation that Brock and I had. Jan Ira, he asks, hello, don't you feel that overgeneralization of more and more aspect of our lives is behind the evil of today's world? For example, good old meaning of life, taking the concept of meaning and applying it to wherever I feel like it, instead of keeping it for originally intended subjects where it is valid, like why the sun rises, etc. Then this highly intelligent nonsense is taking over our mind, creating those far-left ideologies where there is almost impossible to give counter-arguments, only feelings. That is not good. Sorry for not using Instagram sticker, but there is a limit for characters. Thank you very much for doing your interview with Brock. Really looking forward. I'm one of those who praised your podcast to Brock personally. Firstly, thank you so much. Like I said last week, the more you guys tell people that you meet, or when you buy stuff on Bandcamp, the more you guys spread the word, the easier it is for us to get people on. If you want me to get Mortis on, just make sure that anytime you meet him, anytime you buy anything by Marduk, you just keep on pushing into the Necrosphere. Now, if I understand your question correctly, you feel like overgeneralization is behind the evil in today's world. I don't know whether I misunderstand or misinterpret what you meant by overgeneralization. And maybe I'm not the person that's qualified to be able to answer this question, because it's a pretty deep one. We can probably talk about this for many hours on end. Maybe it's a topic of conversation to have when I speak to Cheyenne again on Into the Necrosphere. I would say, for me, it is ignorance and it's indifference. And actually, the third big thing that I would say that is causing a lot of the evils in the modern world, I would say, is a lack of people having kids. Because the fact that they don't have kids means they don't have skin in the game for the future. So when they vote, when they make certain decisions, what they're thinking of is, how they feel in the here and now, whether something directly benefits them in the here and now. They don't necessarily think of the world that they're leaving behind. And I know that's a very old school mentality and view to have, but I believe that is the case. I'm not ashamed to say it. I think I don't think it's not that you don't have a grasp of future legacy and what you're leaving behind to the next generations if you don't have kids. But I do think having kids gives you a quite different view on that, and it does change your thinking about life quite sharply. It certainly did me. No question about that. It's one of the scariest experiences you will ever have in your entire life. That first time that you hold your child in front of you and you realize there's no instruction manual and everything that you're pouring into this little being that's in front of you is going to turn them into the adult they end up becoming. It is absolutely terrifying. But yeah, I would say definitely ignorance, certainly ignorance of how the economy and how the modern political system works, or actually, frankly, how different political systems work, and actually different economic models. And then indifference to, I think in indifference to things that go on around us. Because I think what happens is you have these very vocal, very active minorities, these fringe groups, and you get them in various strata of society, whether it's fringe groups on the right, fringe groups on the far left, and they bring an idea, or they bring an initiative, or they bring something to the table that maybe doesn't sit right with you, but in the main, most people, whether they're clued up or not, look at it and they go, fuck it, I've got my own life to lead, Netflix to watch, my own shit to be getting on with. And then that particular thing takes a hold and becomes, normalized. And then they step it up and they bring the next thing to the table and the next thing to the table. And before you realize it, that line of acceptability has moved well past, or certainly is brushing up against the red line of most intelligent people. And then you have what, in my opinion, happened in this last US election. A lot of people's red lines were crossed, and they said, okay, we've had enough of this bullshit now. And they voted the way that they voted. That would be my view. And I as much as I have my views on the outcome of the election, I think, again, if you look at it completely and utterly apolitically, there's no question whether they were going to vote for Kamala Harris or whether they're going to vote for Donald Trump, that many of those votes or voters were single-issue voters, which I don't think is the right way to go about doing things. I think you owe it to the fact that you have the right to vote, to be educated about it, but that's just not reality. Reality is an undefeated champion, and the fact is, for some people, it was one thing or two things, and that was it. That is what motivated the vote. But equally, when I talk about like these little incremental gains made by the bad actors, last week I was quite vocal in my views on the minor attraction acceptance movement, which I think is absolutely fucking disgraceful. But I mean, where does that come from? That is a group of people that are trying to latch that onto the LGBTQ community. I certainly hope that community has sense enough to distance themselves from that very, very fucking quickly, because the reason they're trying to latch it onto that community is because they know that they can then suddenly get to a point where if you start saying, hey, this person's a pedophile, they can go, oh, well, how do you call me a pedophile? That's a slur, and therefore hate speech. And I mean, I'm not just making this up either. There's a bunch of fucking... Just go on X or go on Blue Sky and, if you can stomach it, look up some of the garbage that some people are talking when it comes to this. There was a woman that did a video a while back, and this was probably like 18 months ago, where she's now supposedly teaching us about the minor attraction and how it's a perfectly normal sexual preference. It's like, no, it's fucking not. It absolutely isn't. And she even went as far as to say in that video that pedophile is a slur, and she's really actively pushing for it to be treated as hate speech. So that's what I mean. I think when those sorts of things are introduced into civil conversation, civil society, and too many people are indifferent towards it, the next thing you know, the red line has been crossed, and the age of consent gets dropped to fucking 13 or some crazy number. So I don't want to ramble, but hopefully, Jan, that answered your question. Let's listen to some more music. Death metal bringers Maceration stream the Den of Misery single, which serves as a second taste of their upcoming full-length effort, Serpent Devourment. The latter drops on January the 31st, 2025 on Emancipation Productions. Let us hear what it sounds like, folks. Right, another band that have been around for a very long time, took a bit of time out, came back, signed with Emancipation Productions, much like their label mates in Panzerchrist, but on this occasion, unfortunately, not quite as successful a comeback as Panzerchrist, I don't think. What I like about the song, Jan Bergman Jepsen has fantastic vocals and certainly sounds like he means every word he is snarling in that track. Nikolai Koltoft, their drummer, is pretty decent as well. I mean, overall, the song isn't dreadful. It's not unlistenable. It's certainly nothing like that Detest song, which, really was a load of poo. But it's also not particularly inventive. And where, it was a Tormentor Tyrant, where they won out by virtue of smart execution, I kind of feel like even the execution here can't quite save them. This is entertaining, not brilliant. It's something that if you again, comes back to that middle ground where if somebody played it in their house, I wouldn't think it's awful, but I certainly wouldn't be jumping up to say, what is this? I need to get it straight away. Not terribly... not terribly unlistenable, but it's not really doing much for me beyond that. Okay, Dawn of Solace have unleashed a brand new track called Fortress as part of their forthcoming studio release Affliction Vortex, due out on February the 14th, 2025. Finland's Dawn of Solace offering listening the second advanced single called Fortress. Let's hear what it sounds like. So anyone who recognizes the bald, bearded gentleman doing those growls, that is Thomas Sokkonen of Wolfheart. Multi-instrumentalist on this track, and clearly very, very capable at basically every single thing that he plays on the song. Really like the production as well, like very clean, very crisp. The way it's sounding on these Focal cans, fucking outstanding. What lets the track down for me quite significantly is Mikko Hekilo, the clean vocalist. I just don't think his voice is strong enough to carry a song like this. And I don't quite know what kind of clean vocal would work well here, but his does not. It just lacks guts, it lacks intensity and punch, and it just, as I said, I feel like when you've got Thomas and Mikko vocaling together, as we have on the part of the song that we just paused at, I think it works a little better. But when it's just Mikko by himself at the beginning of the song, it just feels a bit flat. He's just not a vocalist, I think, that can easily convey a degree of emotion or the appropriate degree of, I don't know if the word is passion. Yeah, let's go with that, passion. And it just drains the energy of the song. So potential, but if I were the manager of this band, I would pull Thomas aside and say either Mikko gets some vocal lessons from Kane Kressel of the Amenta, or we may need to think about going a different route. All right, let's do some more questions from the Legion. And once again, I want to say thank you very much to everybody who sent in questions. Really appreciate it. Glad everybody is really liking the Q&A introduction into the news rant. But we've got a question here from Grind Your Mind 77. Puppets, lightning, or justice? Which one is best? That is a superb question, because I think each of those records is almost flawless, but for one song. So controversially, I'll tell you what those songs are, because you may not agree with me. I think on Ride the Lightning, I've never really liked Call of Cthulhu. On Master of Puppets, and this might be the most controversial pick, I've never really cared much for Damage Incorporated. I think the introduction to the song, that like ambient piece in the beginning, is magnificent, but then when the song kicks in properly, it's a bit of a damp squib after the 7 masterpieces that came previously. And then with Injustice for All, I've never really liked To Live Is To Die. I also don't like the production on the album, but To Live Is To Die is just a boring, overlong instrumental. I just don't, generally speaking, like instrumentals very much. Now, Master of Puppets does happen to have one of the greatest instrumentals ever recorded, and a song I do love, in Orion. And if I had to stack up the best on Master of Puppets against the best on Ride the Lightning and the best on Injustice for All, I think I'd go with Master of Puppets. As a matter of fact, I don't think so. I know so. So to answer your question, Grind Your Mind 77, Master of Puppets. Razor Eater Metal asks, you can only watch one for the rest of your life, Sopranos or There Will Be Blood. Probably a slightly easier question to answer than you may think. Yes, There Will Be Blood is, in my opinion, the greatest movie of all time, bar none, no question about it. It's been the case ever since I first saw the movie. However, Sopranos is 6 seasons worth of entertainment. So there's less of a chance that I'm going to get tired of watching that over and over for the rest of my life than There Will Be Blood. So Sopranos, without a shadow of a doubt. All right, Elven King have launched a new single. I almost dread to think how terrible this is going to be, but since I've clicked on it, you're going to have to endure it with me. Italians Elven King are premiering a brand new standalone single, Throes of Atonement. The accompanying lyric video is crafted by acclaimed artist René Barthume. I don't think that grown men should have an obsession with elves or fairies or anything to do with fantasy. But that being said, the band comment here, Throes of Atonement, reflects a big part of the atmospheres and mood of this third and final chapter of the Reader of the Runes trilogy. It pays tribute to the epic power metal of the 90s, a significant influence in our early days, to the extent that it could almost come out of our first album, Heathen Real. The song explores adolescent jealousy and narrow-mindedness, which leads to hatred and betrayal. For all the harm inflicted, whether intentional or unintentional, the ultimate punishments were penance and death. All right, let's hear what it sounds like. Absolutely terrible. I mean, no other way to say it, no way to sugarcoat it, really. It's one of the worst things I can recall hearing in at least 12 months. As a matter of fact, Gloryhammer, who have also put out a new song, and who I will spare us all from having to hear this week, is probably the band that comes closest to how dreadful what we heard is. Completely ridiculous, just childish lyrics by men that wear crushed velvet cravats. It's just not for me. It doesn't belong in metal. That's what I think. I don't personally think that 90% of power metal should be called metal. It's not part of the metal scene. It is just fucking total shite. All right, let's head over to Blabbermouth and check out what's available to us on there as we wrap up for this week. Tool's Maynard James Keenan offers an introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in his new film. They've got a trailer here. Let's watch.
Hello there!
That sucks. We're gonna start over.
Swallowed a bug. Help me, Tom Cruise.
Join our cult. In February 2023, I hosted a series of seminars at my academy here in Cottonwood, Arizona, Verde Valley Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We made a documentary around that seminar, and we're calling it The Great In-Between. The reason we're calling it The Great In-Between is because a lot of people walk through that door have never done a martial art. It seems daunting. So we're setting the groundwork for them to not be scared of this thing. A scenario where they can learn drills, exercises that are in a way the introduction to Jiu-Jitsu. With the assistance of a bunch of amazing black belts that I've met over the years, we walked through many of the drills that you see in your average Jiu-Jitsu academy that are directly connected to the movements you're going to experience once you get into Jiu-Jitsu. Why am I doing this and why is it important to me? You've heard the cliche, those who cannot do, teach. Well, that's me. I'm not great at Jiu-Jitsu, but I understand Jiu-Jitsu and I understand how to teach Jiu-Jitsu. So everything that I've learned over the years and all the generous people, all the generous black belts on every level that have over the years have shown me things and taught me things and spent time with me, I feel it's important to give that back as best I can. And this is how I'm going to do it.
It's pretty interesting that he's decided to release a video on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, I know he's done it, for many, many years of his life. I'm not really sure who's picking up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructionals, especially not beginner stuff. I mean, there's a whole load of YouTube videos you can watch if you want to check that out. But I do like BJJ, and I quite like Maynard James Keenan. I can take or leave Tool. Like, they've got some songs that are great, and it's cool to hear them on like a massive hi-fi because they do pay a huge amount of attention to fidelity. But it's anyway, I mean, I'm kind of indifferent to this video. I saw a very, very cool documentary about Maynard James Keenan's cellars, by the way, like his winery. I think it's called Caduceus Cellars. There's a very cool, like, 3-part documentary about it on YouTube, and he goes into detail about why they started it and, you know, how they kind of go about producing the wine and stuff like that. Very, very interesting. If you're that way inclined, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Okay, moving on. Then we've got King Diamond's entire Los Angeles concert during fall of 2024, St. Lucifer's Hospital 1920 tour. The set list does not feature Melissa. And I've got to tell you, if I were at a King Diamond show and they didn't play Melissa, I would strongly consider rioting. I would not accept that is not part of the show. It's the best King Diamond song ever written. I know it's not quite King Diamond, it's Merciful Fate, but it's a complete and utter masterpiece, and it should be a mainstay. It should come included in the price of the ticket. Body Count to perform on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon next week. Jimmy Fallon, to me, is one of the lowest IQ, most embarrassing, just complete and utter fucking sniveling, weak establishment hacks on the face of the earth. I mean, he just is a sniveling ass, and I can't stand the sight of him. But I will say this, though, between him and Jimmy Kimmel, they do actually sometimes have some decent bands that they get on their shows. Case in point, Body Count. I know Knocked Loose was on Kimmel. Knocked Loose, not quite my kind of music, but, you got to hand it to him. At least he's got music with distorted guitars and screaming on a mainstream talk show. You don't really get that very much, I think, anywhere else. You certainly won't get that here in the UK. Spirit Box's Courtney LaPlante hopes to become the first woman to win the Best Metal Performance Grammy Award. Good luck to her. Again, most of the metal I listen to, I don't think that anybody is and should be concerned with the validation and the vindication of things like the American Music Academy. Fuck those people. I don't know why there's always these long sobbing articles that get written about bands that get overlooked, or how important it is that Mastodon were given an award this year, and rubbish, Metal Hammer, Kerrang shite. The whole idea is that we should be getting away from the mainstream, not fucking catering to or pandering to the mainstream. And there is nothing more mainstream than the Grammy Awards when it comes to music. This was pretty disappointing. Andreas Kisser calls Cavalera's re-recordings of Sepultura's early albums disrespectful. The artistic value is zero. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke about Andreas Kisser, and I was very complimentary of him. So, this isn't meant as a slam or to hate him, but I think that's a bit of a pissy thing to say. And it's especially pissy when you are trying to court the Cavalera's presence at the final Sepultura show. I mean, if I were Igor or Max, I think that would probably be the nail in the coffin of any conversation about us getting back together. I mean, it's not a question of do it for the fans. I mean, there's just nothing. There's no common ground to be had when that's the attitude that you're going to take. And then the other thing is, how is it disrespectful re-recording those early albums? They were written by Max and Igor, as far as I know. I mean, I might be wrong. Maybe Andreas played a big role in Morbid Visions and Bestial Devastation back when he wasn't even in the band yet. But I mean, if it's your music and you want to re-record it, fucking good on you. And of course, I love it, and so therefore it has ample artistic value. So but I was a bit disappointed in old Andreas for saying that. I just think it's just a very, very, it's just a weak thing to come out and say. And again, as I said, it's especially pathetic when you're in the process of talking about how cool it would be to be back on stage with these guys. On the topic of the Cavaleras, Max Cavalera spoke recently on Nailbomb's absolutely seminal Point Blank record. He says, it's a prophetic album that is more relevant now than when it first came out. Let's hear what he had to say.
It's just coincidence that I pulled this out of the cupboard the other day, but
yeah, man. Serious. That is so cool because I love that record so much. I think Point Blank is by far one of my favorite records of all time. It was just a blast to make it. Of course, we really didn't care for anything. We just wanted to make a brutal, pissed off record full of, industrial sounds and samplers and riffage. And it's crazy that Nailbomb is 30 years old next year. And we actually gonna come and do some festivals in Europe in the summer. It's great. I love it. I think it's again, it's one of those records that would be a shame not to play live because it's so good, Like I don't feel the necessity to re-record the Nailbomb record, but I feel that live it needs to be played. People need to hear Nailbomb. In a weird way, Nailbomb Point Blank was almost like prophetic, The stuff we were singing about is what's happening right now in the world,
unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. But you got stuff like 24-hour bullshit with like media. You have, sick life with the drug problem. You have guerrillas with the war in the Ukraine. Yeah, like even the chorus of guerrillas, it's eerie. Always away from home, learn to hate, fight for the land, fucking waste. I think that's how those kids feel like. Those Russian kids must feel like right now going to Ukraine.
I'll pause it there. The more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess. He does have a point. I absolutely adore that Point Blank album. And it is scattered all over my workout playlist, between cockroaches, 24-hour bullshit, wasting away, world of shit. There are just so many great tracks on that album. But I also respect that he doesn't want to re-record it because that really was lightning in a bottle. There's a vibe to that album that I don't actually think you'll be able to recreate. It just came out at a time when it was the antithesis of what I think everybody was expecting him to do. It just had the spontaneous, combustive feel to it, and I absolutely loved it. I can swear, and I'm trying to figure out what that show would have been, but I could swear I've seen him do at least Wasting Away, and I can't remember whether it was with Soulfly or whether it was with Cavalera Conspiracy. I'm going to try and dig that up, but I don't think I've seen any other or any other songs by Nailbomb performed, with him on vocals. Either way, if you haven't checked out that album in a while, time to dust it off and give it a listen. It is very, very good. One last one. As a matter of fact, we won't read another article. I've got another question, and it's actually not a question that was sent by the Legion. It's something that I saw on a Reddit or subreddit called In Metal We Trust. Infinite Sir 2707 asks, is it okay to start a pit if almost everyone is mad that you are trying to start one? He writes, okay, so I was seeing Bad Wolves and Pop Evil had free tickets. I mean, first of all, Bad Wolves, terrible. Pop Evil, possibly even worse. I had free tickets, so I said, fuck it, and went with some friends. For like the first two sets, we were trying to get one going. This one dude told me to watch because I got shoved into him and his girl. Finally, when Bad Wolves came in, they told us to open it up. Finally, and yet people were mad. Towards the end of the show, some chick tries to throw a punch at me and others. Now, I don't know where exactly they were standing. And I've spoken many, many times on the podcast about, how cool it is to be at a show where everything is crazy and there's carnage and blah, blah, blah. But I also would say in this instance, you have to read the room. If you're going to be... What I despise at shows is when somebody is too fucking scared to get into the middle of the crowd or get to the front, get in the thick of the action. And then they come to the back where I'm standing, having a beer, talking shit, chilling out, watching the bands. And there is where they decide they're either A, going to try and start a pit, or they're going to start windmilling, and then they bump into you, and there's that very pathetic, waving of the hands to say they're sorry, but, they're going to just do it again because, God forbid that they figure out, hey, everyone else around you isn't doing the same stupid shit you're doing. If you want to do that, go to the front of the venue or go to where the audience is doing something similar. No, they'll just carry on. So I would say in that instance, that's where if you bump into me, there's a very good chance you're going to get smacked. No, there's no excusing it. I just find it to be, it's as bad as somebody who starts fucking windmilling on the train. With the exception of the fact that there's not live music playing, it's about as fucking stupid. So I would say read the room. The other thing that I would say is it's one thing to mosh, it's another thing to start doing those fucking kung fu kicks that you see at like deathcore shows and like some hardcore shows. When people start kicking and throwing punches and stuff like that, I want to take their legs and just snap it in two. I cannot stand that shit. I also can't stand the pain of saying goodbye to the Legion, which it is now time to do. Folks, I'll be back next week. My guests, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, will be Crisium Infernum and Mephisto of Veil Burner. They will be doing a director's commentary of their new album. And we'll also be doing the usual news rant, listening to music, talking shit. Next week, I should have the boys from Heathen Deity hosting the news rant with me. So, mixing it up a little bit, giving you time to think of some new questions to send my way. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you once again for checking out the podcast. If you've made it all the way until the end, I truly appreciate it. And I will be back next week for a fucking full-throated installment of your favorite podcast. In the meantime, whatever it is that you're doing and wherever it is that you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you bad motherfuckers again next week. Festival.